Not an unfrequent refrain that we hear people say that they are spiritual but not religious. And I think I'm not questioning the reality of what they are saying, but I think what I understand it to mean is that they believe in God, they have a faith in God, they relate to God, they want to do God's will in their life, but they don't feel necessarily any call or attraction to live out their life according to the teachings of a particular church or denomination. They don't identify with that anymore. In fact, you almost get the sense that you're a little less evolved if all you do is follow a religion. You don't really yet have a spirituality in your life. And there's hardly anybody, I think, though, that would say, well, I'm religious, not spiritual. That wouldn't make a lot of sense. Nobody would say that, and yet there seems to be almost a certain amount of that judgment that being religious and spiritual are contrary things. A friend of mine tells the story of once he and his co-workers were just talking about religion, talking about their faith, the church they go to, and whatnot about their life. One lady didn't say very much, and he finally said to her, well, I forget her name, Mary, do you go to church? Do you belong to a church? Are you part of any denomination? She thought a second and said, well, I go to the church that Jesus went to. And everybody looked at her like, what? What church exactly did Jesus go to? He wasn't a Christian, was he? He didn't go to church. He went to synagogue, I assume. But he didn't go to church. He wasn't his own follower, was he? He didn't die for his sins. He went to heaven because in justice he never sinned and separated himself from God. You can't be your own follower, and so Jesus didn't go to church. I mean, that would be kind of an absurd idea, absurd statement from her. Yet it highlights for me some of the problem of being spiritual and not religious, because you have to then decide, well, who is God? What does God mean? How do I reach God? How do I contact God? How do I hear his voice in my life? What does God demand of me? And all kinds of questions that I think a religion is there to answer for us. A religion gives us a certain expectation of our relationship to God. These are the very things that religion says for us, besides giving us a means of relating to God and of connecting to God in our life. I suppose the spirituality has a certain number of assumptions that are made there, probably coming from some religious background. Well, what of course is behind all of that is religious hypocrisy, that it is hypocrisy that turns people off from religion, that religious people who claim that they are believers, that they follow God's will and that God's commandments in their life, actually do just the opposite. And it's that hypocrisy that has undermined, I think, the face of the church, or the face of God, I guess we could say, and makes people think, well, I don't want to be a part of that. Is that what it means to be a religious person? That can hardly be a very good thing. Whether it's from maybe just a grouch who doesn't welcome you and is not a very pleasant person to be around, all the way to very criminal and terribly abusive acts like the priests that were abusive to children, the pedophile cases and the like. Lots of place in between those two things, and inevitably, the reality is everybody that is a part of any religion is still a human being, and we inevitably do not live up to everything that we proclaim. We do not live up to all of our faith. And so we're probably guilty, I know I'm guilty, of the charge of hypocrisy. I don't do everything that I say, I don't live out everything that I say is true and just and is good for a human person. That's simply the reality of our life. And of course we also see people that are spiritual but not religious, and many times they live a very decent life. They live a very good life. They're generous and kind and helpful to other people. And again, people think, well, what's the value here of religion? What does religion add to that mix if you can be good as a spiritual person without being a religious person? Of course, Jesus condemns much of that in the gospel today. The hypocrisy that was betrayed in the lives of the Pharisees, who held human tradition much higher than they held their own, than God's tradition, than God's commandments. They were more concerned about having clean hands than about having a clean heart. And so he rightly condemns this. He says, look, what is evil isn't something that is outside of us. It isn't something out there. The evil really is something within us. The evil comes from our own hearts. And it's there that we need to have a change. It's there that we need to fix our lives. And of course, I'm aware as anybody how difficult it is to change your heart, how hard it is. In reality, you can't change your heart. It has to be only by God's grace, by God's intervention, that our hearts are changed. Well, as much as there is that distinction then between spirituality and religion, or the problems of being a religious person, and that sometimes includes not being a spiritual person, this was, I thought, a really beautiful definition that St. James had in his letter. He talked about, well, what is a real religion? He said, religion that is pure and undefiled before God is this: to care for orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. Well, I don't know where that kind of definition exists, say, within our catechism. Who would define religion like that? We typically think of teaching and laws and rituals that make up what a religion is. But here he says something very different. Religion that is pure and undefiled is to care for orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep yourself unstained by the world. In other words, to reach out to people who are vulnerable, who can't really care for themselves, and to separate ourselves from the corruption of the world, which is generally just the worldly values, from greed that can define a person's life and undermines our true spirituality. Well, I think anybody that would like to claim the title of spirituality could certainly identify with this. What is the true spirituality? What is the pure and undefiled spirituality? Caring for those who are in need, keeping yourself undefiled by the corruption of the world, that is, not being a greedy and selfish person. This, I think, would be a definition that both the spiritual and the religious could identify with very truly. What is a true religion? What is true spirituality? I think St. James gives us a definition that we could live, if we lived out, no separation would exist between the two.